Hello and welcome to PM Agenda. I'm David Spears. Malcolm Turnbull today made the rich list. The rich list put together by business magazine BRW. It estimates his wealth at $178 million, a figure the opposition leader disputes. Does it matter? Is any of this really relevant? How much the opposition leader has in his pocket? And indeed, is money in politics a liability or an asset? We'll talk to our panel about that a little later, Malcolm Farr and Annabel Crabb. And also the debt and deficit dance, which continued in question time today, complete with new props on both sides of the House. First, to some more serious news. There's been another troubling development on the Korean Peninsula today. North Korea is now saying the 1953 armistice with the South no longer applies. In other words, it's effectively threatening military action. It follows this week's nuclear test and a number of missile tests, another one which apparently occurred today. The United Nations Security Council has condemned North Korea's actions this week, but will condemnations do anything? And indeed, will further financial sanctions do anything? How can Pyongyang be brought to heel? Well, very few are ever allowed access to North Korea, but someone who went there last month, who's recently returned, is Australia's own Liberal MP, Michael Johnson. And he joins me now. Michael Johnson, thanks for joining us. First, can I get you to explain, how did you get into North Korea?
Well, I've been trying to go for 3 years now, and so all of a sudden the invitation came in April, and I went there under the banner of the Asia Society with another young chap from Mongolia, who is seen as one of the top young diplomats of Mongolia, and together we were able to go that way.
And were you heavily escorted everywhere you went?
Well, we went under the banner of young leaders, and in that sense, I think they treated us a little bit differently. We went in friendship, we went in peace, we went to build bridges, to meet people, and so there was probably less of a suspicious view to us. But having said that, I know that my room was searched, I know that I was followed, all those sort of things.
All those sort of things.
Yeah.
We're not used to that here.
I was warned when I first went there that would happen, so I was prepared.
Yeah. And what did you see, your overall impressions? I mean, we have this idea from the outside that North Korea is a despotic regime with a starving population and a backward culture. What did you discover there?
The global perception is very different from the reality. The first point I want to make is that an incredibly beautiful city, a very charming city, a lot of European influence, wide streets. I could have easily been in Paris, in the Champs-Élysées. And of course, for me, having never thought like that, I was absolutely gobsmacked when I came across that kind of experience. The other thing about North Korea is that it's a place where it's very sophisticated. People know what they're doing, they know their place. It's very rigid, it's very mechanical, it's very clinical. But I think in that society, in that regime, that's a plus for them in controlling the people.
Well, just on that, controlling the people, did you meet any regime officials? And how would you describe the way the government currently works there?
I did. I had the opportunity of meeting the Deputy Foreign Minister, and I met him only very briefly. He was very engaging, very warm, very personable. He didn't want his photograph taken with me, but at the same time there was clearly a sign of warmth that came across.
And I understand you've been invited back as well.
I have, yeah, and this is the remarkable thing. It's taken me 3 years to get there, and pretty much within 48 hours of landing back in Australia, I received an email from their NGO, which is part of their government regime, of course, to go back there. And I think that's a significant development.
Well, dialogue clearly is important, but let me ask you about the dialogue that you had there. Did you talk about North Korea's nuclear ambitions?
No, I mean, I didn't get the opportunity to talk about that, certainly not with relevant people. You know, there was discussions within the Western community there. The British ambassador, of course, is the only member of the Permanent Security Council that has a presence there. And so discussions at that level, yes, but not with everyday people, of course.
So what is your view then on this week's nuclear test and the United Nations Security Council's condemnation of it? Will that achieve anything?
I think there is a place for condemnation, and of course I stand by the Prime Minister's position there, and the government's position, and the opposition's position. But unless condemnation and sanctions are actually enforced and policed, 100%, in my view, they really are meaningless. And so we have to think differently. We have to think a bit more creatively about how to resolve this problem. We're going to be more innovative in our diplomacy, I think.
Well, what do you mean by that? Because we hear talk about stronger financial sanctions. Will that do much?
Well, if I give the example of my 3 days in North Korea, in Pyongyang, I saw luxury goods there. I saw all that we have in the West pretty much available to clearly senior party officials and the very wealthy and the very privileged. So
where are they coming from?
Well, I would say they're coming from China. I would say they're coming from Japan. I mean, China is the power that benefits to the tune of some $1.5 billion annually. China stands to lose the most economically through sanctions if they are enforced.
And do you think that explains China's reluctance to take an approach that's too heavy-handed when it comes to North Korea?
China's best interest is for the status quo to continue. They would be the big losers in any enforceable and effective sanctions.
Because of trade and because of ideology?
Well, geopolitics, of course, comes into it. I mean, North Korea's on their backyard. And so I think economically, geopolitically, those are issues that come into the equation.
So is it important for leaders like Kevin Rudd to also be putting pressure on China over this issue?
Well, I think we can do that, but at the end of the day, anybody that thinks the North Korean regime and the leader, Mr. Kim, anybody that thinks that they're not thinking through very clearly, very methodically, very strategically their course of action, really, I think, is on the wrong path. They know what they're doing. They clearly have an understanding of where they're going, and we are completely misreading them.
What's going to happen? Do you take seriously the prospect of military conflict?
No, I don't, because if there is military conflict, it's the nth degree. It's nothing. I don't believe that there will be. What I believe, my assessment is that the US administration will talk to them on a one-to-one basis. There are signs that the Obama administration is doing that with Cuba, with Iran, and I think that's a good sign. For my part, I think we should be back in there. We should have an embassy there. The British have a presence there. They are the only Western power that has one there. I had a meeting with the British High Commissioner there, Ambassador, and he thinks we're bonkers for not being there.
So you think we should have an embassy there?
Absolutely. We have to think differently, because the last 5 decades of doing what we're doing has clearly not produced a result. And so what is there to be lost by just trying something differently? That doesn't show weakness in my view.
Could you say the Obama administration's approach of dialogue has worked? I mean, in the wake of this week's nuclear test?
Well, what I'm talking about is actually engagement. I mean, I support certainly a distinguished American becoming an envoy and going there and talking to them. President Carter, I think, made inroads there, and Madeleine Albright made significant inroads when she went there in her time as Secretary of State before the change of government in 2000.
The whole six-party approach, surely that's been left looking a little bit weak after what's happened this week.
Oh, it's a dog's breakfast. I think the big thing is they all have different agendas. The Chinese don't want things to change. The Americans want no weapons, no development of nuclear technology. The Japanese, of course, are concerned about their own internal security and missiles coming across them. I think there's a disconnect between what each of those parties actually want. And that is a problem. So if they're not at purpose, if they're not on the same page, the North Koreans will play them very easily.
So is it important for all those parties, the 5 parties, work out their own position before sitting down with North Korea?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my sources, I knew Christopher Hill previously when he was ambassador there. I mean, I've heard accounts of them, of the Western powers in Japan, sort of deciding on where to go literally hours before meeting with the North Koreans, and that's no way to approach this.
Michael Johnson, we look forward to talking to you after your next trip. When is that scheduled?
Well, I've been invited. I'm not sure if I'm going. There could be an election this year, so that won't happen if I go.
All right, thank you very much for talking to us.
Pleasure, thank you.
We'll take a quick break and then back with our panel, Malcolm Farr and Annabelle Crabb.